"You are fired." Those were the words I received after 18 years of dedication to Novus Tech, spoken by Julian Vance, the founder's arrogant 31-year-old MBA son with a smug grin on his face. He called me expensive overhead, pointed to the glass door, and told me to get out. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I just packed my favorite coffee mug, walked out of the building, and smiled. As the glass doors closed behind me, I knew the countdown had started. The server room always smelled like dry copper and ozone, a sterile scent that had become more familiar to me over the last 18 years than the smell of my own apartment. I adjusted my headphones, watching the execution logs scroll down my monitor in 3 columns of neon green. The query latency was sitting at exactly 1.4 milliseconds. If it spiked to 1.6, the entire backend of the Novus Tech data engine would lag. And when you are processing 12 petabytes of financial transactions a day for 3 of the top 5 investment banks on Wall Street, a delay of 200 microseconds is the difference between a successful trade and a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. My name is David Sterling. If you ask the junior developers in the open plan bullpen on the 3rd floor, they will tell you I am the quiet guy in the gray crewneck who spends too much time staring at compiler logs and drinking black coffee. If you ask Marcus Vance, the founder of Novus Tech, he will tell you I am the reason his company grew from a 3-man operation in a damp basement into a commercial database provider valued at $2.2 billion. For 18 years, I built the compiler that runs this company. I wrote the initial syntax parser on a second-hand laptop while Marcus made cold calls to prospective clients. When our system kept crashing under heavy parallel queries, I spent 3 weeks straight without going home, surviving on cold pizza and energy drinks, to invent what we now call the Distributed Query Compiler, or the DQC engine. It is a highly specialized piece of software that takes incoming SQL queries, compiles them into optimized machine code, and distributes the workload across 10,000 server nodes in real time. Without it, Novus Tech is just a very expensive, very slow filing cabinet. Back in the early days before the venture capitalists came in with their sleek suits and Excel spreadsheets, Marcus and I were partners in everything but name. But when we took our Series A funding 12 years ago, the new board of directors tried to strip me of the intellectual property rights to the DQC compiler. They wanted me to assign the patents directly to the corporate entity. I refused. I might have been a quiet engineer, but I was not stupid. My father had been a union contract negotiator, and he always told me to never sign away the ground you stand on. We spent 3 weeks in arbitration. Eventually, we reached a compromise. I retained sole ownership of U.S. patent number 9,842,105, which covered the core DQC architecture. I granted Novus Tech a restricted, non-exclusive license to use the patented technology. The license cost them exactly $1 per year, but my lawyer, a sharp contracts specialist who had seen his share of founders get pushed out of their own companies, inserted a very specific safeguard in Section 9.2 of the licensing agreement. It stated that the license was strictly contingent upon my active, full-time employment at Novus Tech. If my employment was terminated without cause, the license would automatically revoke, and any continued use of the patented code by the company would immediately constitute willful patent infringement. For 12 years, that agreement sat in a locked filing cabinet in the legal department, gathering dust. The old board members who negotiated it either retired or were bought out. Marcus remained as the CEO, and as long as Marcus was running the show, my position was secure. Then, Marcus had a minor stroke and everything changed. The board decided Marcus needed to take a step back and assume a ceremonial role as chairman. To replace him on the operational front, they brought in his 31-year-old son, Julian Vance, as the new chief technology officer, with the understanding that he would transition to CEO within a year. Julian was a Wharton MBA graduate who wore bespoke blue suits with pocket squares and spent his first week rearranging the office layout to create more collaborative workspaces. He had never written a single line of production code in his life, but he talked constantly about agile workflows, synergy, and modernizing our legacy stack. The first time Julian walked into my office, he did not introduce himself. He just stood behind my desk, looking at my monitors, and asked why I was still using a command line interface instead of a modern integrated development environment. I told him the command line was faster for reading raw compiler output. He smiled, a tight, patronizing stretch of his lips, and said we needed to align our engineering team with modern industry standards. He then asked why my department, which consisted of just me and 2 senior maintenance engineers, had an annual budget that exceeded the entire front-end development team. I explained that my department maintained the core DQC engine that powered the entire platform, and that my 18 years of experience and specialized knowledge were reflected in my salary. Julian nodded, tapping his thumb against his expensive leather watch strap. He did not say anything else. He just looked around my office, lingering on the older reference books on compiler design, before leaving without a word. Over the next 3 weeks, I started noticing the red flags. The junior developers were suddenly barred from sending me direct Slack messages. All technical queries had to go through a new project management portal. Then Julian announced a major cost-cutting initiative to maximize our earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or EBITDA. Novus Tech was in the final stages of preparing for a Series C funding round. The target was $750 million, led by Goldman Sachs, which would value the company at over $2 billion. Julian wanted the financial books to look as lean and profitable as possible to impress the underwriters. I received an Outlook invitation on a Thursday afternoon. The subject line was simply Organization and Alignment Review. The location was the large glass conference room on the 5th floor. I checked my watch. It was 4:45 p.m. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following morning. I took a sip of my coffee, looked at the latency log on my screen, still steady at 1.4 milliseconds, and felt a cold, familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I had seen this play before. Julian was about to make his move, and he had no idea what was written in the legal files he had never bothered to open. The glass conference room on the 5th floor was designed to feel modern and transparent, but to anyone who had spent more than a decade in corporate tech, it felt like an execution chamber. The walls were double-pane glass, overlooking the city skyline, and in the center sat a polished oak table that was too long for the 3 people currently occupying the room. Julian Vance was sitting at the head of the table, his MacBook open, a fresh cup of espresso resting on a leather coaster. Next to him was Sarah Higgins, a junior human resources representative who looked like she had graduated college 6 months ago and was currently trying very hard to avoid looking at my eyes. I sat down opposite them. I did not bring a laptop, just a small notebook and a cheap blue pen. Julian did not offer me a coffee. He did not ask how my morning was. He simply closed his laptop lid by about 45 degrees, leaned forward, and rested his forearms on the oak table. "David," he began, his voice carrying that practiced, rhythmic cadence of someone who had taken too many public speaking workshops. "Thank you for coming up. As you know, we are in the critical phase of aligning Novus Tech for our Series C investment round. The underwriters at Goldman Sachs are looking at our operational efficiency, and they are asking hard questions about our cost structure." I waited. When you have spent 18 years looking at code compilers, you learn the value of silence. In debugging, the first person to speak usually reveals their error. Julian took a sip of his espresso. "We have been conducting a comprehensive review of our engineering department's payroll. To be frank, your salary is a massive outlier. You are currently earning more than 3 of our senior front-end team leads combined. I built the compiler that allows those team leads to query our database," I said, my voice flat conversational. "Without the DQC engine, their front-end applications have nothing to display." Julian waved his hand, a dismissive gesture that brushed my 18 years of work aside like dust on a desk. "The DQC engine is legacy code, David. It was written years ago. It is stable. It is mature. We have 30 junior developers downstairs who are fully capable of reading the documentation and running daily maintenance scripts on it. We do not need a senior systems architect costing us $250,000 a year just to watch a server monitor." I looked at Sarah, the HR representative. She was staring intently at a printed document in front of her, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "So," I said, looking back at Julian, "what is the proposal?" Julian leaned back in his chair. "This is not a proposal, David. This is a restructuring. We are terminating your position effective immediately. Novus Tech is transitioning to a leaner engineering model. We will be outsourcing the low-level server monitoring, and the junior dev team will take over the DQC codebase under my direct technical oversight." I let the words settle in the room. Under his direct technical oversight, Julian could not tell the difference between a pointers array and a database index, but he was confident he could manage a high-performance query compiler. Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly as she slid a folder across the table toward me. "David, this is your severance package. The company is offering you 4 weeks of salary in exchange for signing a standard release of claims and a transition agreement. You will also be required to sign a new non-disclosure agreement before leaving the premises." I opened the folder. The document was a standard boilerplate severance agreement. It was 12 pages of legal jargon designed to protect the company from wrongful termination lawsuits. I flipped to the signature page. "You have 7 days to review the document," Sarah added quickly, as if she was reading from a script. I looked at Julian. He was watching me with a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. He believed he had just saved the company $250,000 a year, and that he would receive a glowing review from the board of directors for his decisive action before the Goldman Sachs audit began on Monday. "The door is right there, David," Julian said, gesturing toward the glass exit of the conference room. We have security waiting downstairs to escort you to your desk so you can pack up your personal items. Your system access has already been deactivated. We do not need you dragging this process out. I closed the folder. I did not sign the document. I put it back on the table. I do not need 7 days, I said, my voice remaining calm, almost gentle, and I do not need the 4 weeks of severance. Julian blinked, his smug expression slipping for a fraction of a second. What do you mean? I mean, I am declining the severance package, I said. I stood up, taking my notebook and my blue pen. I will pack my things now. Julian smiled again. Recovery quick. If you do not sign, David, you do not get the payout. That is your choice, but the decision stands. We are moving forward without you. Understood, I said. I looked at him, letting my eyes rest on his expensive suit, his Wharton-class ring, and the small cup of espresso. Good luck with the Series C demo on Monday, Julian. I turned and walked out of the glass room. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the lobby holding a single cardboard box containing my personal books, a framed photograph of my father, and my favorite coffee mug. The security guard, a guy named Marcus who had known me for 10 years and looked incredibly embarrassed, escorted me to the glass turnstiles. I am sorry about this, David, Marcus muttered, looking down. Do not worry about it, Marcus, I said, smiling at him. You are just doing your job. I stepped through the turnstiles and walked out into the bright Friday morning air. As the heavy glass doors of Novus Tech closed behind me, I took a deep breath. My system access was gone, but my phone was still in my pocket, and my lawyer's phone number was speed dial number 2. Julian thought he had just fired a legacy employee. He had no idea he had just cut the wire to the only bomb keeping his company afloat. By the time I got to my apartment in South Boston, the anger had completely burned off, replaced by the cool, comforting logic of system architecture. I set my cardboard box on the kitchen counter, made a cup of green tea, and opened my personal laptop. I dialed speed dial number 2. Robert Mercer answered on the second ring. Robert had been my personal attorney for 15 years, a sharp, gray-haired Scotsman who specialized in intellectual property litigation and had a reputation for reading contracts the way forensic investigators read crime scenes. Robert, I said, leaning back in my chair. Julian Vance just fired me. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by the soft rustle of papers. Without cause, Robert asked, his voice calm, professional. Without cause, I replied. He called me expensive overhead and told me the junior developers could maintain the compiler. He offered a standard severance package with a release of claims. I declined to sign. I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard tapping. Excellent, Robert said. If you had signed that release, you would have waived your rights under the licensing agreement. Did they mention the DQC patent? Not a word, I said. Julian doesn't even know it exists. He thinks the compiler is just a legacy script owned by the company. Robert laughed, a dry, quiet sound. Well, he is about to get a very expensive education in patent law. I am pulling up your original agreement from 12 years ago now. Let us verify the details. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the formal legal notice. Robert was meticulous. Every word had to be precise, citing the exact sections of the United States Code to ensure the Novus Tech board and their underwriters could not ignore it. The core of our argument was simple. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 261, a patent owner has the exclusive right to assign or license their patent rights under specific contractually defined conditions. My licensing agreement with Novus Tech, specifically Section 9.2, stated in clear, unambiguous terms that the license to use U.S. patent number 9,842,105, the distributed query compiler, was non-transferable and strictly contingent upon my active full-time employment at Novus Tech. Because Novus Tech had terminated my employment without cause at approximately 9:15 a.m. on Friday, June 16th, the condition for the license had ceased to exist. Therefore, by operation of contract law, the license was automatically revoked at that exact minute. Furthermore, our notice cited Title 35, Section 271 of the United States Code. Any continued operation of the DQC compiler by Novus Tech, including running the compiler code on their servers, distributing compiled database binaries, or displaying the system's performance to third parties, constituted willful patent infringement. In the United States, willful infringement carries severe penalties, including treble damages, which means the court can triple the actual financial damages awarded, and the immediate granting of permanent injunctive relief, which would legally force Novus Tech to shut down their entire database network. By 3 p.m., the document was finalized. It was a cold, formal piece of legal precision. Where are we sending it, Robert? I asked, reviewing the final draft on my screen. Robert adjusted his glasses. We are sending it to the legal department at Novus Tech, of course. But more importantly, we are sending it directly to the office of the lead managing director of the underwriter team at Goldman Sachs. They are the ones managing the $750 million Series C funding round. Under federal securities laws, Goldman Sachs has a strict duty of due diligence. If they proceed with a funding round while knowing the target company's core technology is subject to a major patent dispute and potential shutdown, they can be held legally liable to the investors for billions of dollars. We sent the notices. We sent them electronically via legal counsel portals, which registered the exact second they were opened, and we sent them via certified mail with return receipt requested to the physical offices. By 3:30 p.m., the tracking system confirmed that the electronic notices had been delivered and opened by both the Novus Tech legal department and the compliance office at Goldman Sachs. I closed my laptop. I walked over to my living room window, looking out over the harbor. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the water, clean and bright. On Monday morning, Goldman Sachs was scheduled to conduct their final technical and legal audit of the Novus Tech platform. Julian Vance was scheduled to run a live demonstration of the database processing 12 petabytes of simulated trade data to prove the system's speed. He believed he would be showing off his company's proprietary technology. Instead, he was about to present a stolen system using a revoked license under the watchful eyes of a compliance team that had just received a 12-page warning from my lawyer. I smiled, took a sip of my green tea, and decided to spend my weekend working on my garden. For the first time in 18 years, the latency of the Novus Tech database was no longer my problem. Monday morning arrived with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze off the harbor. I woke up at my usual time of 6 a.m., but instead of logging into the Novus Tech server portal to check the query compile times, I sat on my balcony with a fresh French press of coffee and a book on woodworking. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the time when Julian Vance was scheduled to begin the live technical demonstration for the Goldman Sachs underwriting team, my phone began to vibrate on the glass table. It was an internal Novus Tech number. I let it ring. It rang for the full 45 seconds, stopped, and then immediately began ringing again. I took a slow sip of my coffee, turned the page of my book, and watched the call screen. On the third consecutive call, I decided to answer. David, Julian's voice erupted through the speaker, high-pitched, tense, and stripped of the polished, rhythmic cadence he had used in the conference room on Friday. What the hell did you do? Good morning, Julian, I said, keeping my tone conversational calm. How is the Series C audit going? You think this is funny? Julian hissed, his breathing heavy. Goldman Sachs just halted the entire technical due diligence review. They refused to let us boot up the demo servers. Their lead compliance attorney stood up in front of the entire board and said that running the DQC compiler would violate federal patent laws and hold them liable for investment fraud. They have frozen the prospectus. The $750 million funding round is on hold. I set my coffee cup down. That sounds like a major compliance issue, Julian. You should probably look into that. You targeted our underwriters, David? Julian screamed, his voice cracking. That is tortious interference. Our legal team is drafting a lawsuit for extortion and intellectual property theft right now. You wrote that compiler while working for Novus Tech. The company owns it. You have exactly 10 minutes to send a signed waiver of patent rights to our legal department, or we will have federal marshals at your door. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the water. Julian, I said, my voice remaining soft, steady. I wrote the core DQC compiler architecture 12 years ago. The patent was registered in my name. The licensing agreement was negotiated and signed by your father, Marcus, and the old board of directors. It is filed under Section 9.2. Did you even bother to read my employee file before you fired me on Friday? There was a sudden suffocating silence on the line. I could hear the faint, frantic whispering of corporate lawyers in the background of Julian's office. You signed a licensing agreement? Julian stammered, the confidence completely draining from his voice. Yes, I said. A restricted, non-exclusive license. And Section 9.2 states that the license revokes automatically upon my termination without cause. When you escorted me out of the building on Friday morning to trim the fat for your EBITDA targets, you revoked your company's right to run the code. Every second your database runs right now, you are committing willful patent infringement under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 20771. Your lawyers know exactly what that means. That is why Goldman Sachs stopped the demo. You are ruining the company, Julian whispered, his anger turning into cold panic. My father built this place. Your father taught me that contracts are meant to be read, Julian, I said. If you want to discuss this further, you can contact my attorney, Robert Mercer. Good luck. I was about to press the red button on my screen when I heard a familiar, gravelly voice cut through the phone speaker. David, wait, don't hang up. It was Marcus Vance. His voice was weaker than it used to be before the stroke, but it still carried the authority of a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise from a basement. I held the phone back to my ear. Good morning, Marcus. I am sorry we have to speak under these circumstances. Marcus let out a long, heavy sigh. I just read the notice, David. I was out of the loop. The board didn't consult me on the payroll restructuring. Julian made a massive mistake, a catastrophic mistake. I did not say anything. I let the silence do the work. David, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. We have 48 hours before Goldman Sachs walks away from the Series C round entirely. If they walk, the valuation collapses, the board will face shareholder lawsuits, and the company we built will be liquidated. Please, tell me what we need to do to fix this. Name your terms. Let us get you back in the office. I took a deep breath. I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. I am not coming back to the office. The time for daily maintenance is over. If you want to save Novus Tech, we need to talk about a permanent patent buyout and a restructuring of the board, and Julian cannot be in the room. I will handle Julian, Marcus said immediately, his voice cold. We will meet at Robert Mercer's office at 2 p.m. today. Just the three of us and our legal counsel. Please, David, don't let my son's stupidity destroy 18 years of our lives. I will see you at 2, Marcus, I said, and hung up the phone. I closed my book on woodworking, finished my coffee, and went inside to put on a suit. The corporate chess match was almost over, and the king was about to be swept off the board. The conference room at Robert Mercer's law office was different from the one at Novus Tech. There was no floor-to-ceiling glass, no minimalist furniture, and no espresso machines. Instead, it had deep mahogany bookshelves, comfortable leather armchairs, and the faint, reassuring smell of old paper and leather-bound legal transcripts. At exactly 2 p.m., Marcus Vance walked in, accompanied by Novus Tech's lead outside counsel, an older corporate lawyer named Arthur Pendleton. Julian Vance was nowhere to be seen. As Marcus had promised, his son had been completely excluded from the room. Later, Robert would tell me that Julian had been placed on administrative leave that morning, and the board had already begun drafting a press release announcing his resignation to pursue other opportunities. Marcus looked tired. The stress of the weekend had etched deep lines around his eyes, but he walked with the steady, quiet determination of a founder who was prepared to do whatever it took to save his creation. He sat down across from me, looked at me for a long moment, and nodded. David, he said simply. Marcus, I replied, nodding back. Arthur Pendleton opened his leather portfolio and set a draft agreement on the table. We have reviewed the legal notice sent by your counsel, Mr. Sterling. We acknowledge the terms of the original licensing agreement from 12 years ago, specifically Section 9.2. We also acknowledge that the termination of your employment on Friday morning occurred without cause. Arthur looked at Robert, then at me. Our board of directors has authorized us to negotiate a permanent settlement to resolve the patent dispute and ensure the immediate resumption of our Series C funding round. We want to buy out the DQC patent, U.S. patent number 9,842,105, in its entirety. Robert Mercer leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. My client is willing to sell the patent rights, but the price will reflect the critical nature of the DQC engine to your company's valuation. Novus Tech cannot close its Series C round without this software. Therefore, we are not negotiating a standard employee buyout. For the next 90 minutes, the lawyers debated the financial structure of the deal. I sat back in my leather chair, listening to the numbers move back and forth. We reached an agreement at 3:30 p.m. The terms were definitive. First, Novus Tech would purchase the DQC patent permanently for $15 million in cash, to be paid into an escrow account within 48 hours of closing the Series C funding round. Second, I would receive a 2% common equity stake in Novus Tech. With the Series C funding round valued at $2.2 billion, my 2% stake was worth exactly $44 million on paper, with standard registration rights to allow me to liquidate my shares during the company's planned public offering next year. Third, I would be appointed as a permanent technical advisor to the board of directors. The position carried a retainer of $50,000 a year, with no daily operational duties. My only responsibility would be to attend quarterly board meetings and review major architectural changes proposed by the engineering team. And finally, the succession plan was modified. Julian Vance was permanently stripped of his CTO title and removed from the corporate succession path. The board would appoint a seasoned database industry executive as the new CTO by the end of the week. Marcus looked at the final signature page, then looked up at me. He had a faint, tired smile on his face. It is a fair deal, David, Marcus said, his voice gravelly. You built the foundation of this company. You deserve your share of the tower. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I appreciate your leadership. We signed the documents. The ink was clean, permanent, and legally binding. By Tuesday afternoon, the legal compliance team at Goldman Sachs had verified the patent buyout agreement. The prospectus was cleared, the frozen Series C funding round was resumed, and the $750 million investment closed successfully on Thursday morning. Novus Tech's valuation was officially secured at $2.2 billion. Julian Vance disappeared from the corporate landscape. The press release was short, standard, and forgotten in 48 hours. As for me, I bought a small, beautiful house on the coast, surrounded by a few acres of ancient pine trees and a small vineyard looking out over the harbor. Sometimes on quiet Friday afternoons, I sit on my deck with a glass of my own vintage and look at the water. I still have my cheap blue pen, my old notebooks, and my father's framed photograph on my desk inside. The corporate world is fast, loud, and full of people like Julian, who believe that an MBA and a bespoke suit make them owners of other people's minds. But 18 years in tech taught me that systems are only as strong as their compilers, and compilers are built by quiet people who know how to write a clause that protects themselves. David Huan Ching.